I think we can all agree that we all love a good story, right? In fact, I personally think that our love of stories is one of the things that makes humans human. Now, my fascination with people's stories has verged on the point of nosiness, but this curiosity eventually propelled me, after graduating college, to spend 10 years working my way around the world, interviewing people from all walks of life. And this was my true education. Listening to people's stories, I learned so much about humans and about the world. And I also saw that in that space of sharing stories, something sacred happened. There was a connection that happened between me and the person telling the story, even if it was someone that I felt so different from before. Cumulatively, over years of hearing people's stories, it actually changed me as a human being. I went from someone who was perhaps a full-time hedonist to someone who was very interested in being of service to the world. And it turns out that my experience of story actually mirrors the neuroscience about story. This is what happens to the human brain on story. When we hear data or information, only a portion of our brain is stimulated. However, when we hear a story, the entire brain is engaged. More importantly, our emotions are engaged. So we learn better, we remember better, we feel connected to the person who's talking to us, and we're even motivated to take action. In addition to all this, stories have been shown to actually heal. And there's a really great study that was written about in the New York Times a couple years ago about the effects of storytelling on people with high blood pressure. So they divided folks into two groups. One group got an informational video with generic health information, and the other group got a video of someone telling their own story of living and dealing with high blood pressure. When they brought the groups back together, they found that the people with the informational video, unfortunately, were not doing very well. Their conditions had worsened. However, the people who had received the storytelling video, their conditions improved as much as if they had been given medicine. Stories heal. This is true on a personal level. This is also true on a societal level. And my experience and witnessing of this healing power of stories propelled me to found a nonprofit called Story for All to bring this transformative power of story into classrooms and communities. Now, in the same way that stories can build understanding, connection, and action, they can also be used as weapons. The most dramatic example of this for me is the war of words being waged against men of color in this country. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how this negative story campaign is panning out. First of all, in the media, when you see media stories about men of color, unless they're celebrities or athletes, and even in many cases when they are celebrities and athletes, these are negative stories focused almost solely on crime. Men of color are almost never shown to be productive members of our society. And then this negative story campaign is perpetuated through absence. Look in your textbooks. How many mentions of African American men do you see? Check it out. This negative storyline is then reinforced and permeates the systems that underlie our culture. Systems such as the penal system, educational disciplinary systems, even things like real estate prices, bus routes, and location of supermarkets. All these aspects of our culture are permeated by these negative perceptions being created about men of color. Now, there's a little bit of talk about this right now, particularly bias in our law enforcement system. I'd like to look for a moment, though, at the bias in our own minds. Another really interesting study has been taking place for the last 15 years through the University of Chicago, where they're bringing in folks in off the street, mainly college students and other community members. They've devised a video game for these people to play, and then they track who people shoot and at what rate. Across the board, our community members and college students are faster to shoot a black target than a white target. And they're also faster and more apt to shoot an unarmed black target than an unarmed white target. So we have all created and imbibed a story about the super killer. The irreparably dangerous black man who kills because it's his true nature, or for drugs, or because that's all he knows how to do. I don't believe this story is true. I believe it's time to uplift a more positive and truthful narrative about what's really going on in our communities and in the hearts and minds of our sons and brothers. So that's what I'm doing. We have created an initiative at my nonprofit organization where we teach young people oral history and we get them out in the communities to uplift the voices of their communities, focusing primarily on communities of color. For one of our projects, I'd like to tell you the story of one young man who I'll call Oscar. And Oscar was a high school sophomore when he entered our program, and he was one of our most enthusiastic participants. He had perfect attendance. He came to every class. He was really getting good with the video camera. And he was really excited to conduct his first interview. So when Oscar didn't show up to class one Friday, we were concerned, and we gave him a call. Oscar picked up the phone, but his voice was muted. It really didn't sound like him. All he would say is, "I'm not coming to class today." After some gentle prodding, Oscar told us that earlier that day, his best friend had been on his way to Oscar's house. But then some guys started to chase him. And his friend ran like the wind and made it all the way right in front of Oscar's house. But then they shot him. They shot him down. And they stood over him and they shot him 9 more times, right in front of Oscar's house. At the time of hearing this story, I was aware of certain statistics. I understood intellectually that in Oakland Unified School District, 45% of all students know someone personally who has died in a homicide. But it wasn't until I heard Oscar's story that I felt sad, and I got a glimpse of what does the statistic actually mean for our young people. To be witnessing people die. As another young person said to me, children should not be seeing these things. And I agree. This is a matter of life and death. So I have made it my personal mission, and also the mission of Story for All, to dismantle the negative perceptions that are enslaving these young men just as surely as the chains from which they have only recently been freed. A few weeks ago, I was fortunate to travel to Selma, Alabama, and present about our work to some young people there. There was great enthusiasm in Selma. In fact, word spread about the project, which is called The Shine, throughout town. And we began hearing from young people, many of whom hadn't even been to the presentation. One such young man wrote a letter to one of my colleagues in which he said, "I am a student at Selma High School with God-given talent. I feel my life is being experienced in a cage. I have been trying and trying to be heard, but it seems nobody is listening or searching. But I feel that you could help me on my way, sir. Please, sir. Looking for hope." We need stories to help create an opening for relationships. We need stories so that people can understand one another, connect with one another, and be motivated to take action in support of one another. We need stories to inspire hope. And as a brilliant young man on our team said, first we have to uplift the community, then we have to strengthen the community. Hope is an important first step, but we must also dismantle the dehumanizing structures that are holding our communities down. And for this, again, we need story. Many of our policymakers simply do not understand the needs of their communities. Or if they do have an intellectual understanding, they may not feel connected to these issues. It's not my problem, it's not my responsibility. We need to make the human connection so that our policies change. Now, when many of us hear a story like the one of Oscar, we may feel sad, but then something happens. There's another story in our brain that mutes the sadness, a story that says, oh, that boy was probably in a gang. That boy was probably a drug dealer. We're able to distance ourselves from our own emotions because of this pervasive story in our head. But is this internal story accurate? When a young white man commits a crime, the media is very quick to say, he had such promise, he was the exception. When a young black man is a victim of a crime, not even the perpetrator, the media doesn't call him the exception. This was an expectation. At some level, that young person deserved to die. Well, I don't believe these people deserve to die. And so I'm doing everything I can to replace these negative stories with ones that are more truthful and more humane. We need to change the narrative so that everyone in this world can thrive. And I'm asking you to join me. This war is not being waged across the world. This war is being waged around the corner, and it's going to take all of us to make a change. So when you hear a story or a statistic, be curious. Ask yourself, what's the other side of this story? What word is being spread? Now is the time. We have a country where we have the freedom to express our voices. That's not something to be taken for granted. We also have a moment right now when millions of people are ready to listen. Now is the time. And make no mistake, war is being waged in this country, in our communities, in our schools, and in our homes. But even so, there is hope. I just like being me, one young man said. Community is unity, a few young brothers said. I plan to go to college, 100% of the African American young men we interviewed in Oakland said. I want to be a psychologist, a theologist, a father, safe. I feel safe in my heart because I got people who care about me, one young man said. Now, people often ask me, why are you, a white woman, doing this work? The answer for me is simple. It's because I care. This is not a black issue. This is not even an American issue. This is a human issue. And these young people matter. Their voices and their brilliance and their talents and their goodness is needed. Just like you young people in this room, these young people are the treasure of our nation. And it is my life's work to help make all these voices shine. Now, this is not easy work. Sometimes it hurts to care, actually. I was feeling this pain the other day, and I went to go pick up my daughter from school. They had just been putting a new display in her room where the kids were given a piece of paper, a sentence to complete, and then a picture to draw underneath it. The sentence read, just like Dr. Martin Luther King, I have a dream. And in this space, my daughter had written, just like Dr. Martin Luther King, I have a dream, which is everybody is loved. This was it. A 5-year-old had just encapsulated my entire life's work and dreams and visions in 3 words. Everybody is loved. It is my duty to create a loving world where everyone can thrive. And again, I ask you to join me in this work because now is the time. When we create the space for stories to be shared and we listen to each other with respect, goodness shines. I don't want blood on our young people's hands, on our streets, and on our front pages. I want goodness to shine. When we share our stories, goodness shines. Small sparks in the night sky. Well, sparks become flames, and flames become wildfires. Story by story, we light up the night sky. This is how stories heal the world.